If you've been a fan of the Cosmere for a while, you may have wondered which characters in the different books would be the best among them. Perhaps you've always wondered who would best who in a fight, or just who the better developed character is. Brandon Sanderson has given us a plethora of characters in his Cosmere books, and today we'll be looking at two very prominent characters to determine who the better character is. We'll look at the different aspects that make up each of these two characters and compare them to determine the winner. I'll likely be doing this with quite a few more Cosmere characters, and if there's any other characters by Brandon Sanderson that you'd like to see me compare, let me know in the comments below. But for today, we'll be comparing two of the most popular characters in all of the Cosmere. We have Vin from the Mistborn trilogy and Kaladin from the Stormlight Archive. Two incredibly popular and well-loved characters from arguably the two most well-known Cosmere series. We'll look at the different aspects of each, namely their backstory, their growth, their personality, their relationships, and finally which one would win in a fight. 5 different criteria, meaning there can only be one winner here. Also, while there will be minor character and power related details revealed here, I will endeavour to keep away from any major plot points and avoid spoilers. That said, some details about their abilities and other personal aspects are sometimes revealed later in the story, and thus I would like to issue a word of caution to anyone who watches this but has not yet read these two Cosmere works. So without dragging this on far longer than it needs to be, let's get going, starting with the first category, backstory. Backstory. While backstory is often intimately tied with a plot, I will avoid any details that may give away certain plot points here. Let's start with Vin. Vin's backstory is not for the faint of heart. She was incredibly young when her mother went mad and killed her baby sister. Her brother ran away from home with Vin to forge a new life on the streets of the Final Empire. They spent years living as urchins in slum and working for thieving crews across the realm. While Vin's brother did what he could to protect her, he also regularly abused her both physically and mentally. By the time we meet Vin, she's working for a thieving crew after her brother abandoned her. She feels worthless and doesn't know how to trust those around her. Her anxiety has basically taken control of her whole life at this point. And now we look at Kaladin's backstory. Now, Kaladin has a bit of an unfair advantage in that we get entire chapters of flashbacks for him to flesh out his backstory in the Stormlight Archive. So let's look at what we learn about Kaladin. Kaladin was the son of a surgeon in a small but prosperous town in the Alethi Kingdom. Having been trained his whole life to follow in his father's footsteps, Kaladin often had deep internal struggles between his desire to be a surgeon, like his father, and his desire to become a soldier, as he always dreamed he would. Then one day, Kaladin's younger brother gets conscripted into the military to fight in a border dispute, and Kaladin volunteers to join as well in order to help keep an eye on him and keep him safe. Suffice to say, this doesn't work out for Kaladin, as he is eventually captured and sold into slavery after a massive betrayal from someone he believed he could trust. Kaladin had always had trouble with mental health and depression before, but by this point it becomes even worse and he considers taking his life at multiple points in the story. So which of the two backstories between Vin and Kaladin takes the win here? On Vin's side we have a deeply scarring and traumatic past and upbringing, while on Kaladin's side we have a lot more detail and a more nuanced look at his character. I believe the best way to judge this would be to look at which character is most affected and changed by their backstory in order to see which is more impactful and which has more influence over the character as a whole. And in this instance I would give the point to Vin from the Mistborn trilogy. Kaladin's backstory is strong and impactful for sure, but without going into spoilers, I feel I can safely say that Vin's past definitely has more of an impact on her as a person, even as late as the final book in the trilogy. So in this instance, round 1 goes to Vin. Growth. Now we'll be looking at how each of these two characters have grown from the beginning of their story to where their story has left off. And while I'm aware that Vin's story is concluded while Kaladin's is still ongoing, I feel there's enough on Kaladin's side to make this a fair fight. Starting with Vin, her growth from the first book to the last is incredible to see. She starts off as this introverted, shy, anxiety-riddled teenager who doesn't trust a single person around her. When we finally get to the last book, she's matured into a young woman who has a supportive cast of friends and family around her. And while she still struggles with residual anxiety and fear from her past, she has managed to find a way to deal with that in a healthier way. Also, she of course goes from a street urchin with no knowledge of her abilities to becoming one of the most powerful warriors in the world. She becomes renowned as the knife of the Empire and strikes fear in the hearts of her foes. So overall, I'd say Vin has some super solid progression as a character. Kaladin, on the other hand, undergoes some extremely compelling growth of his own. He starts as this wretch of a man who contemplates suicide daily and has essentially given up any hopes of a better life. But throughout the books, we see him slowly but surely come to the grips with his mental illness and start to cope with it. We also see him learn how to better interact with those around him and form deep bonds with the men of Bridge 4. And in terms of his abilities, the progression is just as good since the growth of his power is closely linked to the promises he makes and the kind of person he becomes. But I would definitely say that Kaladin likely becomes one of the strongest warriors on Roshar by the end of the 4th book. So keeping that in mind, I would say that Kaladin's power progression and his personal growth are far more intertwined than that of Vin. With all of that said and done, I would like to give the point to Kaladin on this one. I honestly feel his growth is more impactful and central to his arc as a character than Vin's growth is for her. And with how closely linked his powers and personal growth are, I feel that Kaladin is definitely the more developed character of the two. Personality. The personalities of these characters are arguably what will draw most readers in, and what will be the most important factor for a lot of readers in determining whether or not they actually like the character as a whole. And I believe that the personality of a character is usually a blend between their own backstory up to that point and the growth that they've undergone as well. So starting with Vin, I'm going to be honest and immediately say that her personality is a lot more muted than Kaladin's personality. But let's examine that. I'm not saying her personality is weaker or less important. I'm saying that her personality doesn't seem as prominent on the page as Kaladin's does. She's strong, determined, and fiercely loyal to those she loves. She doesn't trust everyone and is usually looking over her shoulder just in case. That said, she's also a deeply vulnerable character with some genuine moments where my heart really went out to her as the story progressed. But I feel like her personality doesn't shine enough and doesn't get displayed prominently enough on the page for my liking. Now let's look at Kaladin. Right off the bat, we understand that while Kaladin is a deeply depressed person, he's also loyal, brave, and wants nothing more than to protect those close to him. He has his dark days, sure, but he will still put the safety of those he protects before his own. We see him when times are good, and most often we also see him when times are bad. He will often let these dark times get to him, but he will still make it out at the end. And when he does, he will have grown stronger for it. His personality is front and center when we get his chapters, and we're never left feeling that he doesn't have enough of a presence on the page. So it is for that reason that I will give this victory to Kaladin. While both characters have deep and nuanced personalities, Kaladin is very prominent while Vin's feels a bit more muted. Kaladin is a bit more in your face than Vin, and while that's probably apt for her as a character, it does swing the favor in Kaladin's direction here. Relationships. The relationships between characters in a book are often the main way we as readers will get to know the true personalities of the characters we're reading. There's a lot that can be inferred about a character by the relationships they keep, whether it be friend, foe, lover, or acquaintance. So if we look at Vin's relationships, we'll see that she very much surrounds herself with a tight group of friends and allies that she knows she can trust. Due to her natural suspicion of everyone new, it's difficult for her to allow new people into her circle. But when she does, she is fiercely loyal to them and sees them as close to her as family. Her relationships with Elend, Sazed, Calcia, Breeze, Tensoon, and all other characters in the books radiate this warmth and genuine bond that few authors manage to pull off like Brandon Sanderson does. I couldn't imagine her being separated from any of those close to her, and when she made her final decision to strike against the enemy at the end of Hero of Ages, It seemed like such a genuine moment because we know how much she cares for the people she wants to protect. If we then look at Kaladin's relationships, we'll see another example of a person who deeply cares for the people around him and a person who wants to protect all those he cares about. A very similar dynamic to Vin, yes, but there is a key difference that will influence the result here. You see, with Kaladin's relationships, we often have situations where the people he's around are separated from him by some social barrier. Whether it be his relationship with Dalinar, where he's not only the subordinate but also the Dark Eyes, or whether it's his relationship with Bridge 4, where he's the superior and the leader of their order. There's always this disconnect and different dynamic with Kaladin's relationships, and while I'm not saying that it makes those relationships any less important, real or central to the character, I do think it's a very slight step down from the relationships Vin has. Vin sees the people around her as her new family, where Kaladin sees the people around him as comrades and close friends. While I personally really like Kaladin's relationships in the books, I feel like Vin's relationships just go that extra mile toward being a deeper and closer connection. As such, the point goes to Vin here. I could easily have swung the other way, since I do believe that the bond between soldiers and men facing death on a daily basis can be much stronger than familial bonds. And there are studies that back this up. But since I've never been in such a situation, I can't speak from any level of authority, and in that case feel that Vin deserves the win here. Combat. The final criteria we'll be looking at is the combat capabilities of the two characters. This is basically the age-old question of who would win in a fight, and honestly, the answer is much harder to come to than you might think. And while I don't want to spoil anything plot-wise, I will warn that Kaladin's abilities are not really revealed until the end of the first book. His abilities also become progressively stronger and more defined throughout the books as well. So if you haven't read up to Rhythm of War yet, there may be minor spoilers for Kaladin's powers, but nothing plot-wise. So Vin is a Mistborn with an array of abilities that she can use against her enemy. Take it a step further when you realize she's also extremely naturally gifted as a Mistborn, since we see in the third book that she can outskill raw power any day. As an Allomancer, she's reliant on having her metal reserves fully stocked, and preferably in an environment with a lot of metal for her to utilize in the fight. Kaladin is a Knight Radiant that has all of the abilities of a Windrunner and a highly skilled spearman. He needs Stormlight to fuel his abilities, but from what we've seen, he's very capable even without the Radiant abilities that Stormlight fuels. Unlike Vin, however, he does not need specific terrain for his abilities to work at full capacity. At first I was unsure who would win between the two. If we leveled the playing field and essentially allowed the fight to happen in a city with plenty of metal, I can definitely see the fight being incredibly intense. However, I can't overlook the inherent weaknesses Vin has compared to Kaladin. First, Vin can only steel push to a certain height before the anchors she's using is too far down to lift her any further, while Kaladin has no such limit. Secondly, while being able to push and pull on weapons would be a huge advantage in a fight, I do not think it would work on a shard blade, considering it's pure investiture and not really metal. Also, with Shardplate, Vin will have a very hard time inflicting much damage against her enemy. And even if she got past that, a Radiant can heal from almost any wound nearly instantly. So while Vin could flare Pewter for strength and durability while also using emotional allomancy to get into Kaladin's mind and have that work against him, Kaladin could potentially end the fight before it bears any real physical threat to him. If Vin could somehow prolong the battle enough for her to send Kaladin into a depressive spiral of self-hate, then maybe she could win, but the odds are slim at best in my opinion. So because of this, I'd give the edge and the victory to Kaladin. Vin is an excellent fighter, don't get me wrong, and she could probably kick the ass of almost any Cosmere character period. But in a fair one-on-one fight against Kaladin with all his abilities available to him, the odds of him just ending the fight before she could do anything to him is too likely for me to ignore. And with that, we have our winner for the first episode of Cosmere V.S. Kaladin comes out the winner here, and while I absolutely love Vin and consider her a very strong and powerful character, Kaladin just edges her out very cleanly here. And while I think it would be impossible given the timeline of the Cosmere, it would have been very cool to see these two characters meet at some point. But if you have any suggestions for the Cosmere characters you'd like to see pitted against each other, let me know in the comments below. This is a new series I intend on doing at least a few more episodes on, so keep an eye out for more. Anyway, that has been it from me for today, guys. Thank you very much for watching, I really appreciate it. My name has been Raven, and I will see you next time. Take care, everybody.